I guess the quietness means it's time to start, and the clock says it's 10. So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to a first day of the week, and we're going to be continuing with Job. I'm probably going to be doing a lot of the talking today. There's a couple of reasons for that. We got quite a bit to finish before the end of the month, and so that's a part of the whole process. But if you got something you really want to talk about, we'll hopefully just let me know, and we'll try to address that. If you would, pray with me, please. Our Father in heaven, we are so thankful for your loving kindness. We ask that you be with us as we look into the book of Job this morning. May we honor you and learn from it. Praise be to your name through Christ. Amen. All right, some of what I'm going to do in the first couple of minutes here is a review again. I'm big on that. I think it sets the stage for where we are at different points in the book, especially in a long book like Job, to recount everything. So we know the story of Job. We've been going over it. We have here a man of wealth. He's a patriarch, probably living sometime in between the time of Abraham and Moses. Maybe, my supposition is that maybe it's during the time when the children of Israel were growing in Egypt, and he was a man in the land of the east. We can't prove that or whatever, but that may make sense to some. It does to me. He's described as a righteous man, blameless, upright. He feared God and shunned evil, it says in the first few verses of chapter 1. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and it was a day in which, a day and time when your wealth was measured and how much livestock you owned. And Job was very wealthy. He had a lot of land, he had a lot of livestock. I've always been impressed by verse 5 of chapter 1, that so it was when the days of feasting had run their course that Job would send and sanctify them, talking about his children, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus Job did regularly. And so Job was righteous to the extent that he wanted to, just in case, make sure that everybody's in a good relationship with God. It may be that my sons have done this. I want to make sure that we're right with God, even if that means going above and beyond the minimally required things that I must do. And so in Job's mind, it wasn't a matter of how close to the line can you get without crossing over. He wanted to stay clear from that line and make sure he and his family were in a good relationship with God. Now, of course, Satan, he wants a shot at the righteous, doesn't he? And so Satan takes his shot. God gives his seal of approval of Job to Satan, and Satan responds by saying, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands and his possessions, and have increased in the land. But now stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your power, only do not lay a hand on his person." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. And so we know the story here. The next thing is Satan takes away Job's children and basically his possessions. He has not so much left after this. And it happens in rapid fire fashion, doesn't it? You've lost this, Job, and another servant comes in who's left over, the only one who's escaped. You've lost this, Job. You've lost this, Job. Now you've lost your children, Job. And so he's lost his servants, most of them. He's lost his children. He's lost his livestock, his wealth. And so in verses 21 and 22, he says, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." In all this, Job did not sin, nor charge God with wrong. Now we come to round 2. And so round 2, God gives his seal of approval again to Job, although Satan has incited God against Job. Chapter 2 and verse 3, the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil?" And still he holds fast to this integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without cause. Incidentally, here, sometimes we like to defend God and say, well, Job, you just don't understand what was going on. God never defends himself to Job like that. And so that's worth, God doesn't need us to defend him from attacks from Job or others or anybody who would suggest that God is wrong or has wronged somebody. All right, so in verses 4 through 6, so Satan answered this time, all right, the Lord, and said, skin for skin, yes, all that a man has he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will surely curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, he is in your hand, but spare his life. Now this time, after Job's lost all his possessions and his children, all his wealth, now he loses his health too. And he has boils all over. He's in misery, and he loses, his wife's undergoing some stress too, probably. And so he loses her support in this too. She's wrestling with the same things. And it's in this state that his friends Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar show up on the scene, presumably to comfort him, although we see that they had some other things in mind as well once they got there. So after some time, Job speaks. And his first speech is, I wish I were never born, or I wish I had died at birth. This is just miserable. And he goes on, and we're not going to cover everything, of course, in every chapter here in this review, but he wants to know, why is it that those who are in misery, the miserable, remain alive? Why is that the case? Food's loathsome to me. I have no rest. And Eliphaz in chapter 4 and through chapter 5 responds to Job. And his response is basically, isn't it obvious what's going on here, Job? Isn't it obvious what the problem is, Job? Chapter 4 and verse 7 in particular. Remember now whoever perished being innocent, or where were the upright ever cut off? All you got to do, Job, is look to yourself to see the source of your problems and look to God for the source of solution. Well, that sounds kind of wise, like we've said all along, but it's really not because of the application he's making. And so Job responds in chapter 6 and talks about, yes, I have complained. Yes, I've said some things, but am I complaining for nothing? Look at me. And he reminds his friends that a friend should show kindness. And that in chapter 7, my flesh is caked with worms and dust. My skin's cracked and it breaks out afresh. I'm in misery here. 7 and verse 20. Have I sinned? What have I done to you, O watcher of men? Why have you set me as your target so that I am a burden to myself? He starts questioning why. Why is this happening? At first he's questioned, why do those who are in misery remain alive? Why can't I just die and get this over with? But now he's starting to question, why is it that God, that you've allowed this to happen, or that you've done this to me? All right, so Bildad speaks up. And Bildad says, if you feel so bad, then why don't you just repent? And Job in chapter 9 says, because I don't have anything to repent of in this. I'm blameless. I've lived a righteous life. But God's not available to me to reason with me and for me to go to and actually get him to take up my cause the way I would like. And in chapter 9 and verse 29, he basically sums up that this is not fair. It's useless to be righteous if this is how life's going to be. Chapter 10 and verse 2, he says, I will say to God, do not condemn me. Show me why you contend with me. I want answers. And the friends take turns pummeling him, telling him what the answer is, but not really. And in chapter 11, it's Zophar's turn. You've claimed purity, Job, but oh, that God would speak. And in fact, chapter 11 and verse 6, he says, Know therefore that God exacts from you less than your iniquity deserves. So you're actually getting less than what you deserve, Job. You should be thankful for that. And so it goes on. Job responds, I'm mocked, and for no reason. And maybe as a rebuttal to some of the arguments that they're making, and maybe some as a complaint about the fairness of life, he reminds them that robbers prosper, and those who provoke God are secure. And in chapter 13 and verse 23, he says, Name my sin. He's addressing God, but it's in front of the friends. Tell me what my sin is. Name it. If I'm so bad and I'm so unrighteous, then tell me what that is, if you can. Okay, so Eliphaz tells him, You're full of folly, Job. And in chapter 16 and verse 2, Job tells his friends again, he's told them this throughout, miserable comforters are you all. You're doing such a horrible job. He had already told them that even if I were unrighteous, you should do a better job than this. And so we go back and forth and back and forth. You've sinned, Job. No, I haven't. Life's just not fair. Or everybody goes through hard times sometimes. It's just my time. You've sinned, Job. Your situation proves it. No, I haven't. You've sinned, Job. Repent. Name my sin. Tell me what I've done wrong if that's the case. You've sinned. No, God has wronged me. Chapter 19, verse 6. This is not fair. God has done this to me, and wrongfully so, is the idea there. Finally, Eliphaz in chapter 22 says, Okay, Job, you keep talking about name your sin. You want to know what you've done wrong. Here you go. And he starts accusing Job very specifically of sins that he has taken part in. You've taken pledges against brothers for no reason. You've stripped the naked of clothing. You've not given the weary a drink. You've withheld bread from the hungry. You've sent widows away. You've crushed orphans. All the worst kind of things that a man can do is just to take advantage of those who are powerless. And so Job in chapter 23, as it were, basically says, I've had it. And maybe it's even harsher than that. I've had it. Ooh, I wish I knew where God was. I knew where I might find him. I would present my case before him. I would know the words which he would answer me. He would have to take note of me and be convinced by my arguments, and would have no choice but to relieve me of my distress. And we talked a little bit about this attitude. He's brought God down to the level of mankind and a human judge, where we might sit there and when we see the judge go, you got a point there, Job. I never considered it that way. I never thought about that before. I guess I will relent and change my mind. That's how Job is picturing God, and he's demanding that God show his presence and answer and show his righteousness before all the friends and everybody else. All right, so Job further complains about the violence on the earth and how things just aren't right the way that things are allowed to run. Not going the way it ought to. And the rounds go on until they have really nothing left to say to each other. And that brings us to chapter 32, when Elihu comes on the scene. All right, so Elihu had been here the whole time. We see that because, for a couple of reasons, he is able to fairly quote the things that the friends have said and what Job has said. So he's been there the whole time. Some people believe Elihu is the writer of the book based upon a couple of things. One is the fact that he has been there the whole time and is able to accurately write down what has happened. He also, there's indications that some believe that he knows the thoughts, he writes down the thoughts of Elihu, and how could that be unless he's the writer? We got to take that a little bit with a grain of salt. Maybe, but maybe not. I mean, when God's the ultimate writer of the book, then God knows the thoughts. So, that argument can be easily dealt with. But nevertheless, a lot of people do think Elihu's the writer. He's remained silent, we see in chapter 32, though. And that's because he had respect for age. And so he's the younger of the folks here. He's the youngest of the folks here for those who are English majors. He's the youngest of all these folks. And he's offered the respect that would be due to somebody who's in a position of honor, somebody who's older. And so I kept silent and I listened patiently. But he says, I'm frustrated by what I've heard. Chapter 32 and verse 9, great men are not always wise, nor do the aged always understand justice. And so you're reminded a little bit of Ecclesiastes 4 in verse 13. Better a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king who will be admonished no more. Elihu then had a different answer for Job. Now, there are some different views on Elihu overall, and some believe that he had pretty much the same answer that the friends were giving, that he condemns Job too. I believe when you look at the context of everything that he says, he's actually commenting on Job's responses to his friends, not the original premise. The original premise was, Job, you must have sinned, you must be in some great state of unrighteousness, therefore these things have happened to you. Elihu is not saying that anywhere. He's saying, based upon your response to all the accusations that have been made, Job, you've stepped over the line, and I'm trying to help you here. We're going to see that in several places when we look at Elihu in chapter 33 and verse 7. He promises that he's not there to hurt Job. Surely no fear of me will terrify you, nor will my hand be heavy on you. Now, Elihu has some tough things to say to Job. He criticizes Job, but he tries to let him know that ultimately what I'm trying to do is help you out here. Verse 32 of chapter 33 says, if you have anything to say, answer me, speak, for I desire to justify you. So my motives are pure here, Job. I'm not out to get you. I'm out to help you. His approach throughout the things that he has to say, I believe, are fair in that they represent the things that Job had said, or at least contextually the things that Job had said, not his original state and why he was there. At the end of the book, Elihu was the only one of this crew who was not rebuked by God or told that he needs to repent. And I always found that telling, that you've got a guy here that God is saying, okay, no, this is nonsense what you're spouting out, Job. Job repented. God tells Job that his friends need to repent. But Elihu was never told any such thing that we have any record of. And when you look at the things that Elihu had to say, you will see some of the exact, almost word for word, things that he says to Job, God ends up saying to Job also when God speaks in chapter 38 and following. All right. So all these things make me believe that Elihu is really not doing the same thing that his friends had done. So it's important for us to consider the words of Elihu then. And so in chapter 32, Elihu speaks, and he really gives the prelude to what I would call his first speech, which begins in chapter 33. And so let's look for a few minutes at his three speeches that he makes, beginning in chapter 33 and verse 8. Surely you have spoken in my hearing, and I have heard the sound of your words, saying, I am pure without transgression, I am innocent, and there is no iniquity in me. Yet he finds occasion against me. He counts me as his enemy. Is this all fair so far, what Elihu is saying Job had said? I believe it is, almost word for word in some cases, but certainly it captures the flavor of what Job's arguments have been. He puts my feet in the stocks. He watches all my paths. Look, in this you are not righteous. I will answer you, for God is greater than man. Why do you contend with him? For he does not give an account of any of his words. For God may speak in one way or in another, yet man does not perceive it. In a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls upon men, while slumbering on their beds, then he opens the ears of men and seals their instruction. In order to turn man from his deed and conceal pride from man, he keeps back his soul from the pit and his life from perishing by the sword. Man is also chastened with pain on his bed, and with strong pain in many of his bones, so that his life abhors bread, and his soul succulent food. His flesh wastes away from sight, and his bones stick out with which once were not seen. Yes, his soul draws near the pit, and his life to the executioners. If there is a messenger for him, a mediator, one among 1,000, to show man his uprightness, then he is gracious to him, and says, Deliver him from going down to the pit. I have found a ransom. His flesh shall be young like a child's. He shall return to the days of his youth. He shall pray to God, and he will delight in him. He shall see his face with joy, for he restores to man his righteousness. Then he looks at men and says, I have sinned and perverted what was right, and it did not profit me. He will redeem his soul from going down to the pit, and his life shall see the light. Behold, God works in all these things, twice in fact, 3 times with a man, to bring back his soul from the pit, that he may be enlightened with the light of life. Give ear, Job, listen to me. Hold your peace, and I will speak. If you have anything to say, answer me. Speak, for I desire to justify you. If not, listen to me, hold your peace, and I will teach you wisdom. Job had said, Why won't God answer? And Elihu's reminding him in this passage that God does speak to man in different ways, in fact. And so sometimes, verses 14 through 18, God speaks by revelation. Certainly not an unusual way for God to do things in the days of the patriarch. Verses 19 through 22, not only does God sometimes speak by revelation, God teaches through various trials. So instructions are not always just based upon what God's words are in his revelation. Sometimes he allows man to go through trials to help him get on track. That's a description of Job. God instructs and rebukes through difficulties at times. That's the idea of Hebrews chapter 12, that a father chastens his son, is what the Hebrew writer says in chapter 12. That he does that to help correct him and get him on a path that's better. And so, although we may not know the specific situation or the specific instruction that God is trying to give us through trials, they can help us get back on track by thinking about things that are of a long-term nature, things that are eternal, and recalling our priorities based on that. All right, verses 23 through 26. God may also use a wise messenger. So there's revelations that you might see in visions and dreams and other ways that God can give to man, that God speaks to man. All right? God speaks to man through going through trials so that it can help you get back on track. And sometimes God sends a wise messenger to men to help him get back on track as well. God uses these things in verses 29 and 30 to bring a man's soul back from the pit. So, Job, you've said, Where is God? Why won't he speak? And Elihu says, God does speak. Look at the ways that maybe he's speaking to you and learn from them. Maybe Elihu is that wise messenger in this case that has been sent by God to give instruction and to prepare Job for what he's about to receive from God himself. All right, the second speech that Elihu gives is in chapter 34. And Job had said, Where are you, God? Why won't you speak? He addresses that. He just has. In chapter 34, Job has said, Things just aren't fair. And so Elihu is going to address that next. Look at verse, it's really 10 through 37. But as you look at these verses, as we've noted before, in a way, Job has fallen into the same trap that his friends had fallen into. Maybe not to the same degree. Perhaps he was wrestling with certain notions, how it's useless to serve God if there's no reward in that, or that there's no immediate sight of God's ways, or things aren't fair. And he essentially, though, when he's saying all these things, agreed that even though in this particular case you're wrong, friends, the attitude that you have that the righteous ought to be rewarded at the time that they can see it, that's the fair way, and that's how things ought to be run. And so there's the idea that God needs to improve the way he's running things here. Elihu reminds him in verses 12 through 14 of chapter 34 that God will not do wickedly. Surely God will never do wickedly, nor will the Almighty pervert justice. Who gave him charge over the earth, or who appointed him over the whole world? If he should set his heart on it, if he should gather to himself his spirit and his breath, all flesh would perish together and man would return to dust. God's not going to do things that are wicked, Job. So you need to put that at the front of your mind when you're thinking that God has wronged me, that things aren't being run fairly, and this just isn't right. That's rule number one. And if you get down to rule number 2 and 3 and 4 or whatever, and you're still not understanding it, go back to rule number 1, Job. God's not going to act wickedly. And so he asked in verses 17 through 19, should one who hates justice govern? Will you condemn him who is most just? Is it fitting to say to a king, you are worthless, and to nobles, you are wicked? Yet he is not partial to princes, nor does he regard the rich more than the poor, for they are all the work of his hands. Is it the place of mere man to be challenging God? Can mere man challenge one who is righteous and who is righteous in the ultimate sense? Be careful what you say here, Job. Don't justify yourself instead of God and think, I'm so righteous and I'm so just that it must be God who's gotten it wrong. Don't do that, Job. Verses 21 through 23. For his eyes are on the ways of man, and he sees all his steps. There is no darkness nor shadow of death where the workers of iniquity may hide themselves. For he need not further consider a man that he should go before God in judgment. Job had asked for a meeting with God. And God, Elihu reminds Job, he doesn't need to meet with you. He sees all and he knows all. How much do you see, Job? God sees it all. How much do you see, Job? God's not really in need of your advice. That's the basis of God's speech later on. All right, look at 31 through 33. For has anyone said to God, I have borne chastening, I will offend no more. Teach me what I do not see. If I have done iniquity, I will do no more. Should he repay it according to your terms? Just because you disavow it? You should choose and not I. Therefore speak what you know. All right, Job, what are you doing here? He's saying, I know my place before God, and so it's time for this punishment to end. If that's what this is, or God has wronged me, so he certainly thinks it's that God has afflicted him in some way. Is it the student's place to tell the instructor when the lesson is over? Imagine you're going into your classroom, okay, at high school or university. Please don't do this. You don't walk in and halfway through the lecture say, okay, that's the end of the lesson. Sit down. It's not your place to tell the teacher when the lesson's over. The instruction sometimes needs to go on, even when you think you've already gotten it. And that's what Elihu was trying to remind Job here. Who are you to tell God when class is over? All right, so Elihu has addressed Job's question of why won't you answer God? He's addressed Job's statements about this just isn't fair. And so he's going to talk a little bit about self-righteousness in his next speech. And it ties in a little bit about life not being fair and things not being fair. So there's some overlap there. But in chapter 35, Elihu gives his third speech. In verses 4 through 16 really is the key to this section of the speech. I will answer you and your companions with you. Look to the heavens and see, and behold the clouds. They are higher than you. If you sin, what do you accomplish against him? Or if your transgressions are multiplied, what do you do to him? If you are righteous, what do you give him? Or what does he receive from your hand? Your wickedness affects a man such as you, and your righteousness a son of man, but not God. God's not compelled to respond based upon how righteous you think you are, or how even unrighteous somebody might be. God's not compelled to respond to man's whims and ways and their self-idealizations. Because of the multitude of oppressions, verse 9, they cry out. They cry out for help because of the arm of the mighty. But no one says, where is my Maker who gives songs in the night, who teaches us more than the beasts of the earth, and makes us wiser than the birds of heaven? There they cry out, but he does not answer because of the pride of evil men. Surely God will not listen to empty talk, nor will the Almighty regard it. Although you say you do not see him, yet justice is before him. You don't have to see God in order for him to be executing justice and to know what that is. Nor will the Almighty regard it. Although you say you do not see him, yet justice is before him, and you must wait for him. Wait on God. This is pretty good advice here, isn't it? Wait on God. It's tough sometimes, especially when you're going through a difficult situation. Wait on God anyway, Job. And now, because he has not punished in his anger, nor taken much notice of folly, therefore Job opens his mouth in vain. He multiplies words without knowledge. God later on himself says, who is this who multiplies words without knowledge? Elihu's given him a heads up that that's what's coming, I believe. God doesn't need your advice. God doesn't act because he's compelled to act based upon how righteous you think you are. And just because you think life is unfair doesn't mean it really is, and it doesn't mean that God doesn't see what's going on. And just because you don't see the wicked punished immediately or the righteous rewarded immediately, then you speak out, Job, and you're saying that this just isn't right. What are you doing, Job? You're multiplying words without knowledge. God doesn't react to sin as if he were harmed by it. When you sin or when you do a righteous act, you don't add to or detract from God's righteousness or God's ways. Your righteousness, again, or your lack thereof, does not compel God to act. He's not required to do a certain thing just because you think that's the thing that ought to be done. God's judgment is to bring us in his presence and to enjoy his presence and to understand. This is what we talked a little bit about last week, that ultimately we serve God so that we can be like him. The ultimate reward is the righteousness and the being in the presence of God. It's not because of the things that God gives us. It's we are becoming like God, and we are appreciating that all goodness and things that are peaceful and things that are honorable, those are found in the presence of God and nowhere else. And so I remind you all that we need to be reading the Bible to know God, to appreciate God, to be impressed with God, because that will create love for him. That'll create the sense of us never wanting to disappoint, and therefore we're going to want to obey those commandments But it's not a matter of checklisting, it's a matter of service out of joy because we're in the presence of God. Verses 9 through 14. Men cry out sometimes because of their oppression, because of their despair. But who is it who turns to God for comfort and teaching? During a trial, here's what man wants to have happen. They want God to fix it. I'm in distress. Fix it, Lord. Take it away. We don't like this. But who asks God to teach me in this trial? Instead of laying out your case for self-righteousness, Job, maybe you ought to be spending some time saying, Lord, teach me. Better explain to me your ways. Help me to understand the big scheme of things a little better, or whatever other lesson that God has in mind. Ask God to teach us. And so, Elihu has addressed Job's question of, where are you, God? I want to talk. He already talks to you in different ways. He's addressed Job's claim of fairness. Who are you to talk to God and teach him about who's fair? And who are you to say when the lesson's over, Job? And then he talks to Job about self-righteousness. And he reminds him, wait on God. Wait on God. Now, Elihu has not been satisfied with how Job has responded. We see early in chapter 32 that Elihu's not particularly happy with Job's friends either, because they've condemned, but they haven't really produced any wisdom. They haven't found any answers. That's why he speaks. But out of respect for age, he waited until the end, till everybody else had spoken, before he spoke up. Job has been saying, I know that I'm righteous. And therefore, what has happened to me, that's just a wrong that's been committed against me. Chapter 19, verse 6, God has wronged me. It's no wonder that God responded to Job as he did in chapter 40 and verse 8. Would you indeed annul my judgment? Would you condemn me that you may be justified? God has to say. Wait on God. All right. I've gone through most of the class and I've done talking. Are there questions or comments about Elihu and what he has done? He's not finished. We've got chapters 36 and 37, which I hope to cover next week, and then get into what God has to say, which is chapters 38 and following, and then what the grand result is for Job. So we probably won't get done with everything next week, so it'll take the 22nd. I think Dennis had originally planned to start Ecclesiastes on the 29th. He's got flexibility. He tells me that he could actually start it the next week. We'll talk and see what's preferred. But questions on Job so far, on what Elihu has said, how he has answered the three things that Job has charged and been complaining about. Okay. Let's look at 36 real quick. Elihu also proceeded and said, bear with me a little, and I will show you that there are yet words to speak on God's behalf. I will fetch my knowledge from afar. I will ascribe righteousness to my Maker. Elihu's saying, I'm going to speak some words for God here. We might think at first that, oh, that's presumptuous, but it's not presumptuous if he's been sent by God in the first place. For truly my words are not false. One who is perfect in knowledge is with you. I'm telling you the right things here, Job. Behold, God is mighty, but despises no one. He is mighty in strength of understanding. He does not preserve the life of the wicked, but gives justice to the oppressed. In the long run, these are the things that you can expect from God. It just may not be on your timetable. Okay, so He does not withdraw his eyes from the righteous, but they are on the throne with kings, for he has seated them forever, and they are exalted. And if they are bound in fetters, held in the cords of affliction, then he tells them their work and their transgressions, that they have acted defiantly. He also opens their ear to instruction and commands that they turn from iniquity. If they obey and serve him, they shall spend their days in prosperity and their years in pleasures. But if they do not obey, they shall perish by the sword, and they shall die without knowledge. This is not an absolute case that he's talking about here. He's talking about generalities, that good is going to win over evil. God's ways are going to prevail. But he's reminded Job throughout that, again, that doesn't necessarily occur on your time frame. Who are you to say when the lesson's over? But the hypocrites in heart store up wrath, verse 13. They do not cry for help when he binds them. They die in youth, and their life ends among the perverted persons. He delivers the poor in their affliction, opens their ears in oppression. Indeed, he would have brought you out of dire distress into a broad place where there is no restraint. And what is set on your table would be full of richness. But you are filled with the judgment due to the wicked. Do the wicked, judgment and justice take hold of you. Because there is wrath, beware lest he take you away with one blow, for a large ransom would not help you avoid it. Will your riches or all the mighty forces keep you from distress? Do not desire the night when people are cut off in their place. That's interesting, by the way. Stop desiring to put an end to it all and be busy about doing what you need to in service to God. That's what Elijah was told. You remember when he was so down after the prophets of Baal, he had defeated them, the prophets of Baal and Asherah, and what a great victory, and yet after that, people still didn't turn from their wicked ways, and so he's feeling dejected. He's feeling down, and God has to remind him, get up, Elijah, I've got some things for you to do. You don't get to give up. You don't get to just die and be gone like that. There's things you need to be busy with. All right. Take heed, do not turn to iniquity, for you have chosen this rather than affliction. Behold, God is exalted by his power. Who teaches like him? Who has assigned him his way? Or who has said, you have done wrong? Remember to magnify his work, of which men have sung. Everyone has seen it. Man looks on it from afar. Behold, God is great, and we do not know him, nor can the number of his years be discovered. For he draws up drops of water, which distill as rain from the mist, which the clouds drop down and pour abundantly on man. Indeed, can anyone understand the spreading of clouds, the thunder from his canopy? Look, he scatters his light upon it and covers the depth of the sea. For by these he judges the peoples, he gives food in abundance, he covers his hands with lightning and commands it to strike. His thunder declares it, the cattle also, concerning the rising storm. Consider the ways of God, Job. Be in awe. That'll help you. All right. I would say thank you for your help. Thank you for your ear for the last little while.